we're keeping this death metal train going. Today we are ranking death metal albums from the year 2002, and we're starting with Necrophobic with Bloodhymns. Now, after falling off a bit for me, this album is a real return to form for this Swedish blackened death metal band. Great melodic riffing mixed with blackened menace for a seriously infectious listen. Some seriously ripping solos as well that really complement the already memorable songs. Had a great time with this. It's going to perfection. Then we have Disgorge with Consume the Forsaken. This California brutal death metal band continuing to do just what they do best, pummel the listener with blast beats and vomit and gurgle all over the microphone, and if that's what you want, that's what you're gonna get. But once more, this just isn't really my thing personally. I find it to be a little bit boring with the songs largely kind of running together, so it's going to okay. Then we have Impaled with Mondo Medicale. The second album from this California death and grindcore band, getting a lot of Carcass energy, as with the opening melodic guitar lines of the Hippocratic Oath transitioning to the opening floodgates of Dead Inside. Another really strong mix of melodic death metal and brutal death metal elements, making for their highest fan-rated album to date by a pretty decent margin. Fantastic guitar work courtesy of the late Andrew Labar, who also plays on the Ghoul album we'll get to on this list. I had a lot of fun with this one as well and look forward to giving it future spins. It is going to kill her. Then we have Hate Eternal with King of All Kings. Album 2 for this Florida band, fronted and produced by Eric Rutan. More super dense, technical, and heavy death metal here with no bullshit. I wouldn't call it the most memorable album here, but it consistently hits over its 34-minute runtime, getting downright apocalyptic sounding at times on tracks like Born by Fire. It is going to amazing. Then we have Insomnium with In the Halls of Awaiting. A stunning debut from arguably the most popular melodeath band out of Finland. Great mix of riffs and atmosphere, and still carrying the torch for that more 90s era Gothenburg sound. Love the moody yet folky opener Ill-Starred Sun, which really conjures imagery of nature similar to the album art. Fantastic dueling guitar lines on Medicale and the slow build from the acoustic of The Elder. Black Waters is just an endless barrage of hooks. Just a captivating piece of work, right up there with the classics for me. It almost went to perfection, but again, I always limit myself to how many per tier, so it ended up at fantastic. Then we have Ghoul with We Came for the Dead. Their debut album, very much of an old school influence with a touch of punk energy as well, similar to Autopsy's faster stuff. The raspy, higher pitched vocals are decent, but I really like when they toss in the creepy lower vocal effect like on the first Deicide album. Not in love with it, but it's pretty fun and with some pretty great moments. I'm going to put it at good tier. Then we have Cattle Decapitation with To Serve Man. Shifting onto a more overtly death metal sound and away from the grind influences on this third album. Musically, I'd say it's pretty standard stuff, fairly repetitious chords and tremolo lines over blast beats. The best qualities for me come in the form of Travis's layered vocals, which while still in their infancy are already pretty raunchy. I love this band and how far they've come from here, but I'd say this one is just great tier. Next up, we have Kataklysm with Shadows and Dust.
Shadows and Dust.
Album 6 from these Canadians, and I continue to be somewhat underwhelmed in comparison to what I hear from the diehard fans. That said, I do think that the performances feel tighter and the production is improved without losing that gritty edge. There are some solid and more memorable riffs on tracks like Beyond Salvation, but overall I still find the songwriting to be pretty forgettable, and I rarely get the drive to want to go back to any of these, so this one, it's still pretty decent. It's gonna go to great tier. But then we have Behemoth with the Zos Kia Cultus. Now, if you ask me, this is one of Behemoth's best albums and my favorite of this era of their sound. It's still got that raw 90s death metal with lots of heavy grooves on bangers like As Above, So Below, which continues to be one of my favorite Behemoth tracks. You've got the Harlot of the Saints, Blackest of the Black, No Sympathy for Fools, and of course, the title track. This one is going to perfection. Yo, we have so many more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, just a reminder to hit the like button and also comment your own rankings below, because this is just my opinion. There is no such thing as an objective ranking. If you think there is, you are fooling yourself.
You're delusional.
But next up, we have Hypocrisy with Catch-22. Album 8 from these Swedish juggernauts, and this one currently with the lowest audience rating on Metal Archives and Metal Storm. Opening track Don't Judge Me is a straight banger to the point that I was initially surprised by the ranking, but then Destroyed came on and I was like,
ah, I see.
As a nu metal fan, I don't hate this, but I totally understand why death metal fans would be mad, as I'd honestly compare it more to that than even like In Flames' more melodic turn this same year. Unfortunately, I don't think the songwriting or performances are particularly strong even on that front. Give me like Static X over this was what I kept thinking. It's going to okay tier. Then we have Bloodbath with Resurrection Through Carnage. Michael Ackerfeld of Opeth providing vocals on this debut alongside Jonas Rensky and Anders Nystrom of Catatonia, grooving it up with some very in-tune sounding HM2 and Dan the Man Sueno on drums. Plenty of punky, crusty beats on tracks like So You Die, but they can also get a little bit doomy on Mass Strangulation. Love Death Delirium with its mix of spooky atmospheric harmonies and cutthroat chugs, very at the gates. Maybe not as flashy as some of my favorites here, and the production could be better, but just solid death metal to the core with a very 90s inspired sound. It is going to amazing. Then we have Kalmah with They Will Return. The sophomore effort from another one of my favorite Finnish melodic death metal bands. More great riffing and catchy synth lines right from the start with opening track Hollow Heart. Great stylistic variety on display, and the sheer speed of some of the picking is just insane. Love the kind of 80s thrash and heavy metal sounding riffs on Swamp Hell and They Will Return, the epic organ on Human Fates, and the seemingly endless neoclassical melodies of Principal Hero. This is going to fantastic. Then we have Incantation with Blasphemy. I was a little miffed the first time looking at the nearly hour and 15 runtime of this one, especially after being disappointed by Infernal Storm, but I actually think this one is a bit of an improvement. The title track kicks off on a strong note with all of the faster energy and ominous atmosphere I appreciate from this band. The Fallen is an interesting follow-up too, shifting into that great bass intro before the tremolos take off again. But you know how it goes for me. Once they slow things down, I start to check out, and this one even starts to grate on me after a little while. It's a slight step up from the last album, I would say, but still not one that I'd regularly reach for in the long run, so I put it at good tier. Then we have Vehemence with God Was Created. The sophomore album from this Arizona crew, pretty interesting mix of melodic death metal riffing with more gurgly vocals. Solid, if a little generic, and unfortunately I do think the vocals end up being a bit of a detriment over time. I ended up putting this one at killer, though, because musically did a lot for me. Then we have Malevolent Creation with The Will to Kill. Album 8 from this New York band, and I think I may have skipped over Envenomed in 2000, but whatever. Musically pretty solid, fast and borderline thrashy. The riffs feel a little generic, but they're at least more serviceable than the vocals, which feel very one note, from Kyle Simmons taking over from Brett Hoffman. Like after the first minute or two of each song, I get sick of hearing them. Kind of like a Vader light vibe is what I kept thinking with this one. It's going to okay. Then we have Soilwork with Natural Born Chaos.
Follow the hollow.
The Swedes continuing to transition into a more melodic sound with one of their most beloved albums. Follow the Hollow is definitely a classic and one of my favorite songs from them. No small wonder that it got me hooked, as it's another all-time best opener just in general, I would say, and that chorus is insanely catchy. The production also sounds great thanks to Devin Townsend stepping in. Plenty of great songs like As We Speak, The Flame Out, Black Star Deceiver. went to fantastic. Next up is Nile with In Their Darkened Shrines. Critically lauded album number 3 for Nile, but now I will say I don't like the production as much on this one, and at times it can feel a little bit slower. But aside from that, this is another incredible display and further cemented Carl as the incredible death metal guitarist that he is. This album also has their longest song at 18 minutes if you're not breaking it into parts. But personally, I think I'm partial to Short But Sweet Wind of Horus. This one is going to amazing. We have Opeth with Deliverance. Definitely not my favorite Opeth album, but to be fair, no album wants to follow up Blackwater Park. Plenty of great moments though. Strong start with Wreath kicking off heavy, and I love that little tribal drum interlude. Fun start-stop riffs on the title track, and love the clean singing on A Fair Judgment. A few steps back, but a grand listen. As usual, I put it at killer. Next up we have Origin with Informis, Infinitas, Inhumanitas. I've mentioned that I've never been in love with this band despite the admittedly impressive technical riffing and wild drumming. They start to fall into that style over substance curve for me, and it doesn't help that I find the vocals underwhelming and the production pretty bad. It has this sort of muddy sound to it, but I do appreciate the 28-minute runtime as well as the Dogma sample on Inhuman, but now I think I'm going to end up using that as more of an insult meme in future videos.
Anyone who isn't dead or from another plane of existence would do well to cover their ears. Right about now.
Yeah, ultimately, I put this one at great tier. Then we have The Crown with Crowned in Terror. Still not really feeling these guys either and how they walk the line between death metal and metalcore. If I wanted that, the superior choice is definitely Darkest Hour, if you ask me. And if I wanted a bluesier take on melodeath, I'd rather go with The Haunted. I don't really like the production or songwriting all that much, and the vocals are kind of hit and miss. Better than the last one, I think. I like some of the folkier melodies, but still not moving up very high. It went to good tier. Then we have Vomitory with Blood Rapture. This Swedish band's 4th and highest rated album on both Metal Storm and Metal Archives, which is extremely rare for those to line up, especially on the higher end. And I think overall, I concur. Another great showing of speed and thrash-influenced riffing, just super heavy with this very tight performance. Technical, but not overly flashy. Hooky, but not overly melodic. Great mix of old school and Gothenburg influence. Very focused too at 32 minutes. I am putting this one at perfection. Then we have Amon Amarth with Versus the World. This 4th album is where Amon Amarth started to shift into the style they're most familiar for, with the mid-paced head-bobbing grooves and more emphasis on the melodic riffs. Death and Fire is definitely the highlight for me, with those pounding, almost tribal-sounding drums and instantly recognizable driving riffs. I think that the atmosphere is great, especially the little touches like the church bell in the intro for the stab wounds in our backs. Across the Rainbow Bridge is solid as well, but I also find myself bored with how slow and repetitive some of these tracks get, like Where Silent Gods Stand Guard. It turns into almost a drone after a while for me, especially in the second half. I know some people absolutely adore this album and will even say it's their favorite Amon Amarth album. For me, it is going to killer. Then we have Mithras with Forever Advancing Legions. Big dramatic organ intro on this one, which makes the explosion of instrumentation all the more jarring on the appropriately titled Trample Their Works. I'm of two minds on this one, as if their goal as a death metal band is just to be as loud and destructive as possible, they've certainly achieved that, but at the same time, the peaking audio and distorted mix can be quite exhausting to the point that I feel like my brain just starts to shut down completely. At the very least, it stands out, and in a way, its savagery reminds me of a more death metal take on early Sepultura, mixed with a more raw version of Behemoth's Demigod, and the interludes offer your ears some brief solace between the carnage. Wild solos, too. Overall, props where they're deserved, but ultimately it doesn't rise much higher than good for me. Then we have Severe Torture with Misanthropic Carnage. Not too long ago, I listened to the latest 2024 release from this Dutch band, but here we're jumping back to their sophomore effort. More brutal, gurgle-heavy death metal. But I like this one a bit more than Disgorge and some of those Brodekin albums we've covered, as it at least has some fun grooves and pace changes. Even the vocals have at least a little dynamic range to them. Not something that floors me, but a fun listen, and I was a little bit surprised that I put it at great tier. Then we have Decapitated with Nihility. The second album from this Polish band, and vocalist Sauron definitely sounding more like Corpse Grinder with that higher, throatier snarl. Perfect Dehumanization is a great opening track with the perfect mix of head-bobbing groove, blast beat-driven tremolos, and those crazy melodic picking parts. Same goes for Mother War, Nihility, and Spheres of Madness, hearing that Dimebag influence for sure on Babylon's Pride. One of my favorites from them. You can check out my tier list to see my thoughts on their entire discography, as with a few other bands on this list like Behemoth and Insomnium. But yeah, this is going to perfection. Then we have Benighted with Psychos. Moving into a more technical and overtly death metal direction for this one, for the French Death Grinders, kicking off heavy with Paranoia in contrast with the ambient intro. Hearing a lot of those black metal sounding tremolo lines still at this point, which makes for an interesting back and forth. 1 minute it's Dying Fetus and the next it's Dissection. Still pretty sloppy and clunky in execution, both in comparison to their later material, which I love, and frankly other death metal albums released this year. Tracks like Aversion Fanatique feel like pure improvisational chaos, and unfortunately not in a good way. I feel like listening to these guitars too long might give me a seizure, honestly, so it is going to okay. Then we have Vader with Revelations.
We're in days of stability pressure. We're gas. Expansive in the soul of the infinite.
Not one of my favorite albums from these Polish death thrashers, but a very enjoyable one nonetheless from a band I very much enjoy. The Nomad has a great march to it. Love the drumming on Wolf Tribe. Torch of War has a more black metal sounding hook, but The Code is easily the best song on here, and even one of their best overall, I would say, with those super hype riffs. It's going to amazing. Then we have In Flames with Reroute to Remain.
Bring it down.
This was my first In Flames album, and despite all the naysayers, I still have a soft spot for it. In fact, the first song I ever heard from them was Cloud Connected, and I vividly remember hearing those synth lines and epic riffs for the very first time and absolutely soaking it in. You've also got Trigger with more great hooks that really stick in your brain. The title track makes for a killer opener. Transparent is a banger. Egonomic is great. Dark Signs, Black and White, love the music box on Freefall. There are definitely some down moments, but none of them are real deal breakers for me. It's going to fantastic. Fight me.
Sorry, not sorry.
Then we have the Berserker with Dissimulate. The second album from this Australian industrial death and grind band, and despite this being the only record of theirs with a real drummer, the kind of gimmicky drum machine sound still gets old for me real fast. That endless barrage of snare in particular is just so grating. But that said, they make up for it on some level with some excellent vocals, which are absolutely disgusting, and at times with a rapid-fire delivery that must have influenced Archspire on tracks like Death Reveals. I also dig Compromise. This one went to great tier. Then we have Mortal Decay with Forensic. The New Jersey brutal tech death band following up Sickening Erotic Fanaticism with their sophomore effort. Another one that's their highest fan rated on Metal Archives and Metal Storm, but man, does that feel like a lower bar for this one. The croaky frog-like vocals that pop up here and there feel like their version of 6 Feet Under's E, in that it just makes me laugh out loud most of the time. There's clearly a market for this, but again, I just don't think I'm the demographic. I also think that a lot of these songs are just way too long for what they are, so landed at okay. We also have Cephalic Carnage with Lucid Interval. Album 3 from this Colorado band, and I had a decent push to include it from the audience, even though I consider it to be much more of a grindcore album, but it is mixed in with tech death, mathcore, and even a little jazz for good measure. Definitely one of the more interesting listens on this list, but it does feel like it could use a little bit more focus. I put it at killer. Then we have Argos Lent with Incorrigible Bigotry. Ah yes, if it took someone mentioning the cringe ideology behind this Virginia band when I covered the last album, they make it more than clear on this sophomore effort. The song titles and lyrics are pretty gross and extremely try-hard, and unfortunately for them, I don't think the music does enough to overcome that price of admission. I listen to plenty of canceled and controversial bands and can separate the art from the artist personally, but when the art is so deeply grounded in these topics and has little to offer beyond that, besides some maybe half-decent riffing I can find elsewhere, why should I waste my time? They're no Nocturnal Mortem or Deathspell Omega, but they're also not the worst music on this list either, so I ended up putting them at good tier. Then we have Immolation with Unholy Cult. Album 5 and still burning things down, though this album has another shift in production to the previous one. The Malevolence is still there, but it's just not on the same scale, I would say, as that massive wall of fire. It's a little more stripped back in places, but still has its share of insanity on tracks like Sinful Nature and Wolf Among the Flock. There are also some real standout moments, but it also remains pretty consistent throughout, so I landed at amazing. Then we have Cannibal Corpse with Gore Obsessed. Hatchet to the Head is the obvious track to mention here, and it really is among their most memorable in my opinion. Pit of Zombies also delivers on some killer groove, as does Compelled to Lacerate. Lots of cool riffs on Drowning and Viscera. Love the wailing guitars and backtracking opening of the pummeling Sanded Faceless, and When Death Replaces Life adds something a little slower and more ominous to the mix. Another rock solid record. I don't think I love it as much as some of the others as a whole, despite having a few must playlist tracks. Ultimately, I would put this one at fantastic. And then we have Dark Tranquility with Damage Done. The beginning of my favorite trilogy of albums from one of my favorite bands, not to mention this is, I believe, the only Dark Tranquility album where Michael only utilizes harsh vocals, so every single one of these songs is guaranteed to go that much harder. And I'd also say every song is single-worthy too, with the melodies and hooks. It goes fast and hard, but just delivering this smorgasbord of sound that just really just worms its way into your brain and never leaves. I spent endless hours listening to this when I was a teenager, and I still love going back to it to this day. It is going to perfection, and frankly, I think I would say it's my favorite album of this year. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings by year, or this video for whatever YouTube wants to recommend you specifically. Again, let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these albums differently? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Subscribe, become a member, all that good stuff. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.